Have you ever looked at someone and made a snap judgment, only to realize later that you had no idea who they really were? That's exactly what happened when a young security guard saw a tall man in a hoodie and jeans walking quietly into a luxury event in downtown Boston. He laughed under his breath, whispered to a colleague, "What is this guy doing here dressed like that?" But what he didn't know was that the man he had just mocked was Tom Brady. Yes, that Tom Brady, the man who brought 6 Super Bowl titles to New England, the quarterback who defied the odds, the one who rose from being pick number 199 in the draft to becoming the most celebrated player in NFL history. But Tom wasn't always surrounded by cameras, flashing lights, or designer suits. In fact, what this guard saw that day wasn't just a man in casual clothes. It was a moment of humility, of quiet strength. And as you'll discover, it's a moment that left not just the guard, but everyone watching, completely speechless. This story isn't about football trophies or glamorous endorsements. It's about perception, identity, and the silent battles we never see. It's about a man who never needed to wear a crown to prove he was a king. So, stay with us until the end, because what you're about to hear may change how you see Tom Brady forever. This is more than a story about a celebrity. It's a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and the incredible strength it takes to walk into a room and let your presence speak louder than your clothes ever could. It was a crisp fall evening in Boston, the kind of night when the city buzzes with energy. Luxury cars lined the valet, celebrities and executives gathered inside a private gala celebrating charitable efforts across Massachusetts. Security was tight, only invited guests were allowed through the velvet ropes. That's when a man stepped out of a black SUV wearing jeans, a plain hoodie, and old sneakers. No entourage, no flashing lights, just a tall figure moving with quiet confidence. The young security guard glanced at him and couldn't help but scoff. "Hey, sir, this event's by invitation only," he said, chuckling as he looked him up and down. "You sure you're in the right place?" The man paused. No anger, no arrogance, just a gentle smile. "I think so," he said calmly. "My name's Tom." Still not recognizing him, the guard radioed for confirmation, thinking maybe this was someone's guest who had wandered in off the street. A fellow guard nearby whispered, "Why's this guy dressed like he just walked out of a college dorm?" But moments later, the radio buzzed. "That's Tom Brady." "Let him in." Silence. The guard's expression shifted instantly, from smugness to disbelief. His cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The man he had just laughed at was the greatest quarterback in NFL history. The man who had filled Gillette Stadium for decades, who had inspired millions, and who had just taught him a silent lesson about appearances. Tom gave a small nod and walked past without saying another word. He could have called him out, humiliated him in front of everyone. But he didn't. That quiet dignity, so rare in today's world, spoke volumes. Inside, as the evening progressed, word began to spread. "Did you see what happened at the entrance? Can you believe the guard didn't recognize Brady?" People laughed at the mix-up, but underneath the laughter was a deeper realization. Greatness doesn't always come dressed the way you expect, because sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the quietest ones. Some might wonder, why would Tom Brady, a global icon with access to the finest suits and stylists, show up to a high-profile gala dressed like that? The truth is, it wasn't by accident. Tom has always believed that substance matters more than appearance. It's something that was ingrained in him long before he became a household name. Growing up in San Mateo, California, in a middle-class household, Tom wasn't the flashy kid. He was the one who worked silently, who stayed after practice, who didn't always get picked first. Even in college, at the University of Michigan, he wore hand-me-down jackets and stuck to simple clothes, not because he couldn't afford more, but because he didn't care. What mattered was performance, not polish. And that night at the gala, his outfit was more than just comfort. It was a quiet protest against the pressure to look the part. Brady wanted to walk into that event as just a man, not as a brand, not as a celebrity, not as someone performing for the cameras. He wanted to remind people, perhaps even himself, that his value never came from suits or watches. It came from years of grit, sacrifice, and heart. The media often shows us a version of Brady surrounded by glitz, GQ covers, luxury partnerships, Super Bowl rings sparkling under stadium lights. But what we rarely see is the man behind all of that. The man who reads quietly in the locker room before a game. The man who wakes up at 5 a.m. to train alone. The man who still visits his old coaches just to say thank you. That night, by wearing something so ordinary, Tom reminded everyone that extraordinary isn't about appearance, it's about presence. Some guests at the event were initially surprised, even puzzled. "Is that really him?" they whispered. But once he began speaking, sharing stories of his time in New England, his journey to Tampa Bay, and the work he was doing to support local youth initiatives, there was no doubt. The hoodie disappeared. The sneakers didn't matter. What stood before them was a giant, not because of his height, but because of his character. And for those who were paying attention, it was one of the most powerful messages of the night. After the gala, long after the crowd had left and the lights dimmed, the young security guard stood by the entrance alone, replaying the moment in his mind. He couldn't shake the image, how casually he had dismissed a man like Tom Brady. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was something deeper. A realization that he had judged someone without knowing their story. The more he thought about it, the heavier it sat on his chest. He had laughed not just at a man's clothes, but at a symbol of humility. He had failed to recognize that greatness often walks quietly, without the need for applause. And that night, it had walked right past him. The guard didn't grow up watching every Patriots game. He didn't know every Super Bowl stat. But now, as he Googled Brady's name out of curiosity, he began to uncover something more profound than athletic achievements. He learned about Tom's early career struggles, how he sat on the bench for most of college, how he nearly got cut by the Patriots before his legendary rise. He read about Brady's dedication to discipline, his deep love for family, his leadership in the locker room, not by shouting, but by example. And then, he saw the stories that rarely made headlines. How Brady had quietly visited children's hospitals, paid for a teammate's surgery, helped fund schools in low-income areas. None of it was broadcasted with flashing lights or loud headlines. It was just who he was. For the first time in his life, the guard understood what real greatness looked like. It wasn't about designer suits, flashy jewelry, or elite access. It was about how a person treats others when there's nothing to gain, how they carry themselves when nobody's watching. That brief exchange, less than a minute long, had triggered something unexpected in the guard. A quiet reflection, a shift in perspective, and maybe even a small seed of humility. Because in that one moment, Tom Brady didn't just walk past him, he held up a mirror, and the man staring back wasn't laughing anymore. Tom Brady's name will forever be linked to football history. 7 Super Bowl wins, countless records, and a legacy that reshaped the NFL. But for those who've looked a little closer, his impact goes far beyond what happened on the field. Long before the stadium lights faded, and long after the trophies gathered dust, Brady was building something deeper, a life of intention, integrity, and influence. He used every setback, being benched in college, being drafted 199th, losing Super Bowls, to sharpen his focus and fuel his purpose. And he never let fame distort who he was at his core. People often assume that success means becoming unreachable. But Tom chose the opposite path. Even at the height of his career, he stayed grounded. He gave credit to his teammates, he took responsibility in defeat, and he treated staff, trainers, janitors, ball boys, with the same respect he gave to owners and coaches. That's what made that moment at the gala so powerful. Tom wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He was just being himself. And that self has always been defined by one thing: humility. In interviews, Tom has said, "I never wanted to be the person who thought they were better than anyone else. Because the moment you think that, you stop growing." That philosophy shaped not just his career, but his relationships, his charitable work, and the quiet way he navigated fame. For the security guard, and for anyone watching closely that night, The message was clear. Greatness isn't about demanding attention.
It's about showing up, doing the work, and letting your actions speak when your words don't have to. That night, Tom Brady reminded everyone that true legacy is measured not by the cheers of a stadium, but by the respect of those who've seen who you are when no one else is watching.
In a world obsessed with image, noise, and instant recognition, Tom Brady's quiet entrance that night did something unusual. It shifted the energy of the entire room without him saying a word. And that, in itself, was powerful. People began to talk, not just about football, but about character. About how often we overlook the ones who carry themselves with humility, mistaking silence for insignificance. In a crowd filled with polished suits and rehearsed speeches, it was the man in the hoodie who stood out most. Not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't need it. That's the kind of influence Tom Brady has cultivated over the years. Not the loud, performative kind, but the kind that changes how people think. The kind that makes a young man rethink how he speaks to strangers. The kind that challenges the idea that success needs to be flaunted to be real. Tom's story has always been about defying expectations. When he was drafted, analysts said he lacked arm strength, agility, and explosiveness. No one predicted greatness. But he didn't argue, he just worked. Silently. Relentlessly. And now, years later, that same mindset followed him into rooms like this one. No need to prove anything. No need to dress to impress. Just show up, stay true, and let your legacy walk ahead of you. One of the guests at the gala later shared, "That night changed how I see people. I realized how often I associate confidence with flash and importance with noise. But Brady reminded me, real power doesn't need to be loud." The security guard, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about it. He even began dressing differently, not to impress others, but to remind himself that what truly matters can't be seen. He carried himself differently too, with more respect for strangers, more awareness of the quiet moments that define character. Tom Brady didn't come that night to inspire anyone. But that's the thing about true greatness. It inspires anyway, without a speech, without a spotlight, just by walking through the door. To many, Tom Brady is just the GOAT, the man with the most Super Bowl rings, the face of dominance in a league built on competition, but that narrow view misses the heart of who he really is. Because what the world often gets wrong about Tom Brady is thinking his greatness comes solely from talent. It's not. It comes from something far more human: resilience, humility, and quiet discipline repeated every single day. The media loves to highlight the glamorous parts of his life: his marriage to a supermodel, his luxury lifestyle, his massive following. But they rarely mention the mornings when he woke up sore, unsure, and still chose to give everything he had. They don't show the hours spent studying film when no one was watching, or the moments of doubt he overcame after a bad game, a public loss, or a personal disappointment. And they certainly don't show what happened that night when he entered a gala unnoticed and left having changed someone's life. Because Tom Brady has never been about chasing fame. He's been about honoring the process, about respecting the game, the people around him, and the platform he's been given. When he eventually retires, not just from football but from the public eye, his true legacy won't be measured in trophies. It will be felt in the stories people tell, like this one, in the way a stranger remembers being treated with dignity, in the way a guard rethinks his judgments, in the way a room falls silent not because of fear, but because of quiet respect. Tom Brady didn't just play the game, he elevated it, by showing that who you are off the field matters just as much as who you are on it. The moment was brief, barely a minute, but it stayed with the guard forever. Years from now, he might forget the names of the guests, the speeches, or even the reason for the gala. But he would never forget the quiet grace of the man who walked in without needing to prove anything. He often told the story, not out of shame, but as a lesson. To his friends, to his younger brother, to anyone who'd listen. "I judged a man by his clothes," he'd say, "and he taught me more in silence than anyone ever did with words." What Tom Brady gave him that night wasn't just humility. It was a new lens through which to see the world. And somewhere, on another quiet evening, When Brady walks into another room unnoticed, someone else might laugh. But if they look closely, they'll see it. Not the hoodie, not the jeans, but the weight of a legacy carried with quiet strength. That night wasn't about football. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about what we see and what we fail to see when we look at others. Tom Brady didn't walk in demanding attention. He didn't wear a tailored suit or arrive with flashing lights. He simply showed up as himself, grounded, present, quietly powerful. And in doing so, he reminded everyone, especially one young guard, that real greatness never needs to announce itself. The world often teaches us to judge quickly, to assume that wealth looks like watches or that power comes with volume. But moments like this reveal something deeper, that dignity lives in how we carry ourselves when no one expects anything of us. For the guard, that encounter became a turning point. It made him more aware of his own assumptions, more careful with his judgments, and more open to the idea that some of the most extraordinary people are hidden in the ordinary. And maybe that's the deeper legacy of Tom Brady, not just what he did in stadiums, but what he inspired in silence. So now we ask you, what do you think was Tom Brady's most defining moment? Let us know in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this reminder. In our next video, we'll explore another incredible moment that proves resilience and character can change everything, even in the quietest of ways. Until then, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk in as yourself.